Hello, St. Peter's friends. I'm sharing a book with you today. I'm Mrs. Shervanack from the preschool, and the book I chose is one that was in my house when I was growing up, and it is called Little Brown Bear Loses His Clothes by Elizabeth Upham and illustrated by Norman Chartier. Take a look at the bear on the front. That's our main character. In our story, it does talk about trousers, and trousers is just another name for pants. Here's our title page. Little Brown Bear Loses His Clothes. Halfway up Blueberry Hill in an old yellow house lived a little brown bear. Little Brown Bear liked to hunt for honey. He liked to sit on the steps of the old yellow house, and he liked to lie in the hammock under the tree. But he did not like to hang up his clothes when he went to bed. Every night when Little Brown Bear was getting ready for bed, down on the floor would go his nice red coat, his new checkered shirt, and his handsome gray trousers. Into one corner would go his polka dot silk tie, and onto the chair would go his little straw hat. Out the candle would go, and under the covers Little Brown Bear would go. One night, Mr. Moon looked through the window into Little Brown Bear's room and called out loudly, "Such an untidy room for a good little bear! Coat on the floor, hat on the chair." But Little Brown Bear turned over in bed, pulled the covers around his ears, and pretended he hadn't heard a word Mr. Moon had said. Soon Mr. Owl looked in and called out very loudly, "To-wit, to-hoo, to-wit, to-hoo, such a careless thing for a bear to do." But Little Brown Bear just turned over in bed, pulled the covers higher over his ears, and pretended he hadn't heard a word Mr. Owl had said. By and by, Miss Wind came whistling round and round the old yellow house. She called through the window very, very loudly, "Little Brown Bear, don't wait, don't wait. Hang up your clothes before it's too late." But the foolish little bear only turned over in bed, pulled the covers still higher over his ears, and pretended he hadn't heard a word Miss Wind had said. Then Miss Wind blew right in through the window and whisked up Little Brown Bear's nice red coat, his new checkered shirt, and his handsome little gray trousers. She blew again, and away went Little Brown Bear's polka dot silk tie and his little straw hat. In the morning, Little Brown Bear jumped out of bed bright and early. He was going to take his shiny tin pail and go to the woods for blueberries, but he couldn't find his clothes. Little Brown Bear looked everywhere for his clothes. He looked upstairs and downstairs. He looked in every corner and under the furniture, but he could not find them. Little Brown Bear put on his last year's old patched overalls and sat down on the steps of the little yellow house. He cried and cried. By and by, Mrs. Duck passed by, calling out as she hurried down the hill, "You're all invited to come to tea down in my garden at 3:30. That made Little Brown Bear feel very bad indeed, and he cried even harder. For, of course, he couldn't go to Mrs. Duck's tea party in his last year's old patched overalls. So he just sat there in the sun, thinking and crying and crying and thinking. Suddenly, a wonderful thought popped into Little Brown Bear's head. He wiped his eyes on his last year's old bandana and jumped up. "I know what I'll do," he said to himself. "Even if I can't stay for the party, I can take Mrs. Duck a pail of nice, fresh mulberries. I can hurry home before anyone sees that I'm not dressed up." Little Brown Bear ran over to the mulberry tree and shook it very hard. And what do you suppose happened? Right out of the mulberry tree fell Little Brown Bear's nice red coat, and his new checkered shirt, and his handsome little gray trousers, and his polka dot silk tie, and his little straw hat, for that was where Miss Wynne had hidden them after she had whisked them away the night before. Carrying a pail full of mulberries in one hand and his clothes in the other, Little Brown Bear hurried up to his room. He quickly changed into his nice red coat and his new checkered shirt and his handsome little gray trousers and his polka dot silk tie and his little straw hat. Then Little Brown Bear picked up the pail and ran all the way to Mrs. Duck's party. There he saw Mother Bear and Father Bear and Grandma Bear. Even Auntie Bear and Uncle Bear were there, and so many friends and neighbors were there. It was a wonderful party. That night, Mr. Moon looked through Little Brown Bear's window and smiled. He smiled and smiled. Then Mr. Owl looked through the window and smiled. He smiled and smiled. There they are. By and by, Miss Wynne looked in and smiled. She smiled and smiled and smiled. Then she chuckled softly. Coat, hat, and tie hung up with care. What a tidy room for a little brown bear. And that's the end of our story. I hope that you're hanging up your clothes to help out Mom and Dad at home.